Stanford University.
Welcome to the seminar on People, Computers, and Design. I'm Terry Winograd, back from last week's CHI conference. I hear the talk went very well last week. Please, for those of you who came, let me repeat for those of you who are taking it for credit. There's 1 unit for just attending. If you are not an SCPD student, you need to attend 7 out of the 9 in person. The person who handles the sign-up lists is also not back from the conference. So the sign-up list today is just going to be this pad of paper. So if you want credit for the course, otherwise you can ignore it. But if you want credit for the course, put your name, your student number, so we can match it up to the access list. And you'll get credit for attending today. Next week's speaker is Alex Payne from Twitter. So we're staying in the sort of Web 2.0 world for another week. And he'll talk about some of the aspects of the interface for Twitter. Very timely. This week, the speaker is somebody I always enjoy introducing speakers who have been students in our program and then gone out and done great things in the world. So Clara was here at Stanford. And among other things, while she was an undergraduate at Stanford, started a program for literacy in Africa called Camp Amelia, which I just learned at lunch has merged with another project and is still going strong. So it also shows another characteristic I really like about Stanford students, which is they take initiative and go out and make things happen, which is why Silicon Valley's here, right? So, but not just Silicon Valley. The work she's going to be describing is also interesting in that it's crossing bridges, not so much between disciplines as we do in a lot of things, but between cultures, right? That is, we all think of the Web 2.0 social networking culture as, MySpace and Facebook and Twitter, and it's all about me on the web and telling my friends what I'm doing and so on. And then we think of Salesforce, and that's business, right? And so her book, which just came out last week, right?
Yeah.
Called The Facebook Era, is the first book, and her work is a lot of the initial work on how do you bring these two worlds together? How do you take advantage of the social nature of a lot of these new technologies in a context of actually getting things done in business? That's what we'll be talking about today.
Great, thanks, Terry. I just had a moment because it's really great to be back. I spent a lot of hours in this classroom sitting exactly where you're sitting now, and went to a lot of classes here throughout my undergraduate and graduate career, so it's great to be back. As Terry mentioned, my book just came out last week. It's called The Facebook Era, and I was telling Terry in the elevator, I still don't see myself as an author. I really see myself as a technologist. And the way that I came about to write this book was a year and a half ago, while I was already working at Salesforce, I developed the first business application on Facebook, which I'll show you, hopefully, if we can get online, and if not, I'll talk you through what it does. It's called Face Connector. Originally, it was called Salesforce, and as you can tell from the name, it integrates Facebook with Salesforce CRM. And as Terry mentioned, 2 very different worlds. What happens when you bring those together? And as I was thinking about this talk, and many talks that I've been giving recently, and I think what I learned while I was at the HCI program here at Stanford is that ultimately, truly successful technologies are ones that are able to transcend just technology. There are things that change our lives, make our lives better, and that's what we're really seeing with these social networking sites like Facebook and Twitter, is that it's not just a business model, it's not just a technology, but actually it's a sociocultural change in people's behavior and attitudes and interactions, and their relationships, both with one another as well as with vendors. Think about the ways that you interact with your friends and your family now that are different than before, thanks to Facebook. So that's what I really want to talk about today. And in the spirit of practicing what we preach, I encourage you to Twitter about this seminar. How many of you are on Twitter? Raise your hand. Okay, so just about half of you. Well, those of you who are on Twitter, or those of you who want to sign up right now, what's your favorite number between 1 and 10? 9. So the 9th person to Twitter about my book, I'll send you a copy. Great, so welcome to what I call the Facebook era. What is the Facebook era? to me, I think that it's a new era of computing. Just like 15 years ago, we were seeing a new era of the internet emerge. And I call it the Facebook era because it's the largest and fastest growing social network, but really it's a general phenomenon across Facebook and LinkedIn and MySpace and Twitter, and in international markets, sites like Cyworld and Mixi in Japan and Xiaoné in China, and so on and so forth. But on Facebook alone, we're seeing 200 million people logging in every day to interact with their friends and to interact with their companies, and in total spending over 3 billion minutes on this site. And that's an incredible amount of time. Increasingly, the time that people are spending online, they're spending inside Facebook. They're using it as their new web portal into the world. But it's not just the users. There's also over 660,000 developers and entrepreneurs who have basically placed their bets on the Facebook ecosystem. They've placed their careers and livelihoods on this because they understand that it's a big phenomenon and it continues to grow. And the question is email dead? We keep hearing these reports, and I try to stay in touch with a lot of Stanford undergraduates through the different clubs, and they keep telling me that they just email with grown-ups, maybe professors and their parents and prospective employers, but Facebook messaging is actually the way to go. Twittering is actually the way to go. And it's not just them, because there was a report that came out from Nielsen Online, which is a research firm, a couple weeks ago, that talked about how, as of December 2008, so just a few months ago, that use of social networking sites had actually surpassed that of email. I mean, think about that. Who online, what internet user doesn't use email? I don't think I know of any, but even more than that use social networking. And so we're really seeing this new phenomenon, and it's become much more than just a passing fad. We're seeing this new era emerge. And so rather than focus on all the technical details, what I want to do is really explain the sociocultural phenomenon that we're seeing and use that as a contextual framework for us to understand how to design better web applications and experiences. And really, when I developed Face Connector, I think people found it a novel concept because it was summer of 2007, and at the time, Facebook was still largely college students. It was viewed largely as just for being relevant for kids, but it's no longer. In fact, the largest and fastest growing segment on Facebook are people between the ages of 35 and 49. And the second largest segment, surprisingly, are women over 55. So there's some sort of universal appeal about Facebook and about these services, and we need to understand why that it is. And we need to come up with a language for describing what's going on so that we can be strategic about the types of applications and features and functionality that we then deliver. And just to show some of the growth in the United States over the last 6 months, 200 million users at this point, and it continues to be exponential. I think they have something like 20% of the internet users who are using Facebook, which I think is pretty good market share. And when you think about enterprise software, Facebook and social networking is really an example of the technology that it starts in the consumer space and is now making its way to the enterprise. But it really has in a big way. And Forrester, which is a research firm, they came out with a very bold statement this year saying that of all the features and new technical innovations that they're exploring for CRM, that actually social technologies are the most important and the most significant. So I think it's just a sign of the times and a reflection of how far we've come as a society and as an industry. And I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for people to continue to build in this space. So what I want to do for the next hour or so is, as I said, build that contextual framework to understand from a sociological perspective, why is Facebook so universally appealing? And how is it changing the way that we behave and interact with one another? Then I'm going to talk through, from an enterprise perspective, some of the different use cases we're starting to see emerge across the internet for using the social graph. And then the third part of the talk will focus on actual design for enterprise software. But I really want this to be an open and informal and engaging conversation. So if you have any questions or comments during my talk, please feel free to interject. So the very first component that I want to talk about is the notion of online identity. So this is my mom's Facebook profile, and you can see all sorts of information about her, like where she went to school, what she does, her email address, her gender, her birthday, where she lives. This is all information that existed all along. But what Facebook did was it created a template, which is this one, and a trusted forum for people to convey and establish and then convey their online identity. This is really important because prior to Facebook, all this information was still there. My mom could have set up a website and put her favorite movies and her favorite books and her favorite TV shows, but it wasn't socially acceptable because there was no trusted forum and there was no template. People may have thought it was narcissistic. What Facebook has done, though, is they've created a cultural norm. It's now the expectation that you share this information. It's the expectation that you tell people what your gender is and what your favorite shows are and where you're from and where you went to school and where you work. People didn't share that before, but now they do. And that's a really important first step in terms of thinking about how it changes how we interact with people and relate to people on the web, and also how it changes and potentially really personalizes our experience when we go to different websites. But it's not just on Facebook, and it's not just on LinkedIn, and it's not just on MySpace. Actually, because of technologies like Facebook Connect and Google Friend Connect, we can bring our identities and our friends with us. So here are a couple of screenshots, one from CitySearch, which is the nightlife and restaurant review site. The other one is from CNN.com. For both of these sites and hundreds and thousands of others, you can log in with your Facebook ID. So if you have Facebook open in another window, you just click one button and say, yes, I'd like to bring my identity with me. And now all of a sudden, the web is no longer anonymous. The web knows who you are. It knows who your friends are. On CitySearch, instead of just seeing the top restaurants in Palo Alto, you see what restaurants your friends have been going to, which ones that they've rated as 5 stars, which ones they've written reviews about. On CNN.com during the presidential election for Barack Obama, you're no longer watching with millions and millions of people around the world. You're actually watching with your friends, and you're seeing the comment stream come with your friends. It becomes a social experience in a way that wasn't possible before you had the template for online identity. And I was going to show you this, but you can bring your identity to my website, to the facebookera.com. You can log in with your Facebook ID and see everyone else who's read the book and all the discussion topics that they're talking about and which one of your friends likes the book, not just random strangers. That really changes our trust and our view of the internet. Another important concept is the notion of the magnification effect that occurs as a result of the Facebook newsfeed and as a result of social distribution that happens on Facebook. So when something happens, when you do an action or when you update your status message, it's no longer a conversation between you and the brand or you and Facebook, because Facebook broadcasts that on your behalf to all of your friends across your entire network. So a couple interesting thoughts here. The first one is that of transitive trust. So transitive trust is the idea that if Terry likes the Facebook era and he trusts that it's a good book and you trust Terry, you're more likely to transitively trust that my book is a good one. I mean, think about how many decisions we make, whether it's what movie to see, what book to read, what car dealership to go to, that you make based on a trusted recommendation or referral from your friend. Facebook has automated a lot of that on your behalf, and to the extent, even to the extent of what I call passive word-of-mouth marketing. So before, word of mouth was if you were able to create loyalty with your customer, and they liked your product so much, say that they liked your book so much that they would tell their friend, and then their friend would tell someone else. But the old model of doing word-of-mouth marketing was really active. You had to pick up the phone and decide who you would call to tell about my book. Or you would have to create an email and consciously decide who you would actually email about the book. That is a very active request. What Facebook has done is if you put in your status message something about my book or you become a fan of my book on Facebook, even though that should be a conversation just between the book and you, it now gets broadcast to your friends. Your friends see, hey, Bjorn has just become a fan of the Facebook era, or Bjorn wrote about the Facebook era in his status message update, and that gets magnified. His loyalty to you actually extends across his network and has a greater chance of becoming viral. And so as a result of this, user expectations have changed. The bar has been raised in terms of what users expect out of your application and out of your website. They expect you, as a salesperson, prior to picking up the phone and cold calling them, to have done your homework, to have researched their industry, to understand where they're from, to know what their needs are, and to see if you know people in common. Because they want you to have done your homework, because that information is out there now, because of that online identity and because of that template. And when they go to a website, They expect for it to be personalized. It's no longer okay to go to a website and show everybody the same thing. They want it to feel personal, just like that CNN site and just like City Search. And then last but not least, the notion of transitive trust doesn't just extend to books or to different products, but actually to people. And if you want access to someone, if you want to be introduced to someone, instead of relying on chance or asking many, many people before you figure out who your mutual friends are, you can go to LinkedIn or Facebook and instantly find out who your mutual contacts are and use them ask them for a warm intro instead of a cold call. And there are also things like hyper-targeting that you can do on Facebook that wasn't possible before. So again, because of the online identity, that template that we talked about earlier, people put information about themselves that they didn't used to share. And as a result, advertisers on Facebook and MySpace can do what is called hyper-targeting, where they specify different criteria and what kinds of people, what kinds of profile of people that they want to show advertisements to. So based on your gender, potentially your age, your region, your different keyword interests. So if I'm selling pet food, instead of showing ads to everyone, where I know most Americans don't have a pet, I can just target people who have dog or cat in their list of interests. I mean, how much better of an experience is that for me as an advertiser because it's more targeted, and how much better is it for the person seeing the ad? So I had a first-hand experience with this a couple weeks ago after I came back from South by Southwest. My friend Nick and I had been talking about the possibility of him reviewing my book on his blog, which he writes about Facebook. And I gave him a copy of the book, and he actually liked the chapter on hyper-targeting so much that he decided to hyper-target me. And so it's interesting, as you go through the Facebook ad wizard, and as you go and you continually narrow down the criteria, whatever, again, age, gender, school, employer, all those things, it actually tells you how many people on Facebook fit that hyper-targeting criteria. And so he kept narrowing it down until there was just one. And I was just logging into Facebook like I always do, and I almost fell out of my chair because clearly this ad was meant for me. And this is obviously an extreme example because most companies don't have the time to hyper-target on an individual basis, but it really goes to show that instead of just being able to target you based on what words you search on, like Google did, which was great, now potentially we have a way to personalize the web, whether it's ads or something else, in a way that we never did before prior to ubiquitous online identity. The other important concept is that of the communication modes that Facebook and Twitter have invented. So things like a wall post or a poke. I mean, who really knows what that is? No, it's not really clear. Or a tweet, and a Facebook message. These are more casual modes of communication. And what's happening is that just like when we went from in-person meetings to telephones, and from telephones to email, and now from email to Facebook messages, is that our capacity to maintain more relationships increases. We can have bigger networks because the cost of staying in touch goes down. It's so easy to send someone a Facebook message. You don't have to do the whole setup in your email, or you don't have to pick up the phone and hope that they're there when you decide to call. So the idea that now our fringe networks, our weak tie networks expands is a really powerful one, especially in business. Because business research shows that actually social capital is maximized and you're most often doing deals with people with your weak ties. You're not closing deals with your mother or your sister or your neighbor necessarily, but it's actually your friend-of-friend networks. And it's precisely with these weak ties, because of these casual modes of communication, that that's where Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter really excel. But it's not only more casual. In the past, when we became more casual, from the in-person meetings to the phone calls to the email, we lost a sense of personal touch. It's not only more casual, but this time around, it's also more emotional. It's also more personal, because when someone sends you a Facebook message, you can click through and, again, view their online identity and either get to know them better or be reminded of who they are and see who you know in common. So it's more casual and yet brings back more of the personal touch. That's really important for staying in touch with a lot of people. And then if you think about it, over time, you can capture the long tail of relationships. So maybe you meet someone in this class and you have a really great connection, or I end up talking to one of you after this talk, and after the fact, if we don't have something specific to talk about, we might lose touch because there's no reason for us to stay in touch unless one of us remembered every few months to email the other person and to remind each other of who we were. With Facebook, you have this big contact database where the cost of adding someone as a friend is really low, and you can tier friends into different levels of closeness and share different content with different people. And so we could potentially add each other as Facebook friends. And now what you have is an option. You have a friend option. You don't have to exercise it. You have the option, but not the obligation, to then later become friends with someone. Maybe later on it makes sense for us to do a research project together. Maybe later on we both live in the same town, or we're working at the same company, or you want to sell to me, or I want to buy something from you. You never know, but you file that away for later. And in an extreme case, you can look at children. So my friend's little brother, who's 13, just joined Facebook last year. It's a minimum age for joining Facebook. And he's proceeded to add everyone he'd known since he was little. So everyone he was in class with, everyone he went to summer camp with, and arguably at some point, probably around adolescence, he'll want to defriend some of his people, because everyone wants to reinvent themselves at some point. But the point is, 20 or 30 or 40 years from now, he could find himself as a VP of sales at a company. And who knows, maybe that boy, Johnny, that he played Little League baseball with when he was 12 ends up being an important business contact for him. And it sounds trivial that the connection they have is they play Little League baseball together. But that's the kind of thing that establishes emotional rapport and establishes trust for a lot of business transactions. Because people want to do business with people that they know and like and trust, and they refuse to do business with people that they don't. The last thing I'll talk about in this contextual framework is that the notion of the psychology of naming. It's really interesting what Facebook chose to call different things on their site, and it's very subtle, but I'll just call out a few of them. There's many, many more. The first one is becoming a fan. So now, official brands are encouraged to start a fan page on Facebook. So you have Facebook groups, and then you have Facebook fan pages. Groups can be started by anyone for any reason. Fan pages have to be started by the official representative of that brand. So only I or my publicist was able to start the Facebook page for my book. And it's interesting to think about the language around joining a group versus becoming a fan. When you join a group, it's very neutral. When you become a fan, are you able to say bad things about the book? Are you less likely to speak negatively because you're a fan? If you're a fan, why would you say something bad about my book or whatever product page that you're going to? So that's a subtle area. Another one is the idea of basic information. So basic information now includes your networks, so where you work, where you went to school, your birthday, your gender, your hometown, your religious views, and your political views. That's pretty personal information. I actually made some up here because I don't share it publicly. The Labour Party is one that's in Ireland. But that's what they call basic information. So as you're going through, you think subtly, or maybe you don't, it's subconscious, but you see that it's called basic information. So you're encouraged to put that down. And whereas we never would have shared this information before, I wouldn't have created a website talking about my political views and my religious views. Now it's more people are more likely to share this. And then the last one is the fact that connections are called friends. So what if it's someone that you met once? What if it's someone that you've never met at all? I've been receiving a lot of friend requests from people who are just interested in my book. Or what if it's someone that you work with but you don't like, but you don't want to turn them down? The fact that now you're called friends, does that change your interaction with them? Does it change the psychology of how you view them? I think that there's a lot of interesting work to be done there. So that's the sociocultural framework, just a lot of the context for then talking about what that means for everything else. Now I'll step through some use cases we're starting to see in the enterprise world so that you can see the practicality and actual productivity gains potentially from using the social graph for business. So what I think helped start it all was my application called Face Connector, and unfortunately the wireless isn't working, so I can't show you a demo. But I tried it after he suggested it and it wasn't working, so I can show you afterwards if you're interested, but this screenshot is probably quite sufficient. So this is a screenshot of the Salesforce CRM system. How many of you know what CRM is? Okay, so maybe a third of you. So those of you who don't, CRM is Customer Relationship Management Software. It's traditionally B2B software. It's used by companies to manage their customers. So with the idea being that every company has customers or clients of some sort. And so and especially in a B2B environment where you have multiple people selling to multiple individuals at the prospective buyer. You need to coordinate all the activities throughout the length of the sales cycle and be able to manage all of your pipeline and the deals closed and what your sales targets are and automate that workflow to the extent possible. So what I did a year and a half ago was that I attended the Facebook platform launch where they made it possible for the first time for third-party developers to build applications using Facebook's social data. So I sat there through the launch. I thought, wow, this is amazing. Facebook is, I wouldn't have been able to stay in touch with all of my friends at Stanford and Google and Microsoft and Oxford if it weren't for Facebook. And what I started to realize was that actually Facebook is CRM. Facebook is contact relationship management software for individuals. And what happens when you give CRM to 200 million people around the world instead of just elite businesses to manage their customers? What happens when we all become more efficient and productive at managing our relationships across our personal and professional lives? So that was the first thought I had. And the second one was sitting there and seeing the Facebook launch. So how many of you are on Facebook? Hopefully most. Okay, so everybody's on Facebook. So you know about the applications like iLike for sharing music and Slide for sharing photos. So there were a lot of applications that were part of this platform launch, but they were all consumer applications. And for me, working at Salesforce, I live and breathe enterprise software every day. And so I wondered why there were no business applications there. I thought that there ought to be. And in particular, I felt that the social graph was perfect for productivity applications and collaboration. And so the combination of these two thoughts, one, that Facebook is CRM, and two, that Facebook is a perfect environment for business applications, caused me to want to develop this application originally called Salesforce. And what it does, as you can see here, is that when you're logged into Salesforce, in your accounts, leads, and contact records, this happens to be a lead record, it goes and it pulls in that individual's Facebook profile and friend information and puts it inside the lead. And it's dependent on two things. First, what that individual's privacy settings are on Facebook, what information they're willing to share with whom, because we can control that. And then number two, how closely linked you are, whether you're in the same networks, whether you have friends of friends or friends of friends of friends. And so now as a sales rep, this individual, Kelly in this case, is no longer just a faceless lead to me. It's no longer just a name. I get to know the person behind the lead that I'm talking to. And so instead of just picking up the phone and cold calling this person and probably getting hung up on, or sending this person an email, which if she doesn't know who I am, she'd probably think was spam and never even open. Now I have context. I can see, oh, well, we both went to Stanford. We're both from Chicago. We both used to work at Mutual of Omaha. And oh, by the way, we know these 50 people in common that I can either reference in my call or email, or I can just go ahead and ask one of those for a warm introduction. It really changes the nature of the conversation to have transitive trust and to have have common ground where you can really start to build genuine rapport with someone. And it's not only can I view Kelly's profile, she can potentially view mine. It's bi-directional, whereas first generation CRM was unidirectional. I just had a view into the customer, and they had no idea who I was as a person. So if you think about picking up the phone and calling someone and selling them these monitors, now you have a context for potentially getting your foot in the door through transitive trust. So that's what this application was about. It was a simple application that I did as a weekend project, but I think really sparked my personal interest as well as a conversation in the industry to say, wow, Facebook is not just for kids anymore, and there's actually a lot of potential to use the social graph responsibly to make business more efficient and more rewarding for both sides. And a lot of people have asked the question of, well, isn't Facebook better for B2C, so business to consumer applications? But actually, I think that it's equally compelling for B2B, for business to business transactions, because even in B2B situations, again, where you have multiple people at the vendor selling to multiple individuals at the prospective buyer, at the end of the day, it's people. It's individual people who make decisions. Individual people who are your product champion or the influencer or the decision maker. And to the extent that you can foster better rapport between individuals, I think that it paves the way for better, more rewarding business transactions. So that was sales. I'll walk through a marketing example. So one of my favorite marketing examples, in addition to the hyper-targeted ad that I showed you earlier, is the notion of persona marketing. So persona marketing isn't new. It's been around for a while, but it fits especially well with the Facebook and MySpace metaphor because of that identity template that we talked about earlier. So here are a couple examples. On the left is Jack Box, who's the fictional CEO of Jack in the Box, which is a fast food restaurant. And what they've done is they've created a MySpace profile for Jack. And again, it's the language and the naming where there's a huge psychological effect. But anyone on MySpace can become friends with Jack. And in fact, over 160,000 people have. And they are very proud of the fact that they're friends with Jack. They check on Jack all the time. They keep up with the status updates. They look at his videos. And it's an interesting way to incorporate social media, too, because if you click on Jack's blog inside MySpace, every month he issues a new challenge. Last month it was write a poem about our cheeseburger. And hundreds of people did. I don't know where they found the time, but they did. And people love it. And so they leave him messages. They tell him that they love him. They tell Jack that he needs to come to Denver, Colorado, or whatever city in America doesn't have Jack in the Box. So it's been a really effective way to put a face that people can relate to something that would otherwise not be that exciting. It's greasy cheeseburgers. But now it's something that's fun. On the right, we have SASE, it stands for Software as a Service, which is what Salesforce basically coined the term, and that's our model. And so SASE is a dancing mascot for Salesforce, and the no software sign, that's our logo. And enterprise software, again, very abstract, difficult to feel emotional about, but SASE is cute, she's bouncy, she's fun, she goes on tour with us around the world. People love dancing with her. And so again, we're creating a persona that's fun, that people want to be friends with, and to become a fan of on Facebook, and getting better engagement and bringing to life some of these brands that are more difficult to understand or grasp. So the other demo I was going to show was, so we talked about sales, we talked about marketing. The other one is customer service. And 2 weeks ago, I was very excited to work on an integration that we did with Twitter. So Salesforce CRM for Twitter, what that does is it recognizes that increasingly people are using Twitter to complain about products and to ask questions and talk about issues that they have with products. You know, when your headset breaks or when this microphone breaks, the first place people go is no longer to pick up the phone and call the call center or to try to find the vendor's website necessarily. More and more people are going to Google. They're searching, whatever headset is broken or microphone is broken, or they're tweeting about it. And so companies like Dell and Comcast, which is a cable television provider, they've actually assigned dedicated support reps just to monitor Twitter. And so whenever a question comes up, they actually respond in real time through Twitter. And that's great now when Twitter has 8 million people. But what about when Twitter gets to 80 million people or 800 million people? That doesn't scale. And so what we've done is we've partnered with Twitter to say, instead of answering these issues and requests as one-offs, let's bring them inside of your existing workflow and business processes inside Salesforce, in this case for customer service. When someone tweets about something that seems like it could be a complaint or issue or question of some sort, a case is automatically created inside of the Salesforce system, and the traditional workflow gets kicked off. The same workflow that you use when a case comes in via email or when someone calls into your support center and the person is taking notes about what's going on. And so it's really pretty interesting to see, as Terry said, the convergence of these two worlds, kind of the existing world and then the extreme frontier new world. So talked about sales, marketing, customer service. The last one I'll mention is recruiting. So recruiting is actually an extremely social activity. And Aperio, which is a Salesforce partner, has actually built this application called Jobs for My Friends with the assumption that a lot of the best hires that we make as employers, a lot of the best candidates come from employee referrals because good people know good people. A people are able to attract other A people. And so, especially in the tech industry, oftentimes you'll get an employee referral bonus if someone you brought in gets hired. And so the idea behind this application is that as an employee here, in this example of Dell, you would install this application into your Facebook account. This application is built on top of Salesforce, the Salesforce platform, and uses a lot of the workflow and technologies to drive the whole recruiting process. But what happens is this application takes all of the job descriptions that you have inside of your Salesforce system and it matches it up against all of your Facebook friends' profiles to see, based on past employers, where they live, what their interests are, who might be a good fit for what job. So in this case, it suggested Mark Benioff as the VP of sales in Hawaii because Mark loves Hawaii and he has a lot of sales experience. And so as the employee at Dell, I log into this application and I see these suggested referrals and I can decide which ones to actually refer. And once I decide to refer Mark, I can click refer. And then the next time Mark logs into Facebook, he'll see a notification saying, hey, Clara just recommended you for this job. Are you interested in applying? And then if he is, he can click on that and then that'll open up a Salesforce window where he can go through the normal workflow. And if you think about, I mean, this is just a simple example, but millions and millions of dollars are spent every year to help find good talent. And if you can use your employee base better in terms of what networks they have, we think that's another way to achieve those productivity gains. Because in this case, I may not have even known that these people would be a good fit for these jobs because I didn't have time to look at each job description and then to look at each friend's profile for each one. And this application helps automate it, again, by using the social graph. So that's the sociocultural transformation and then the different use cases across the enterprise. Now let's step back and really distill what about Facebook is so appealing and what we can learn specifically when we're designing our own applications. But before I do that, I'll talk about some of the problems that you have when you combine these two worlds. I already touched on this earlier, but there's a huge scalability problem with social media. When you get everybody participating, you have too much content, and as a company, you don't have time to look at each piece of content that gets generated. So what you end up with is what I call this tyranny of too much data. You have too many people tweeting about your product, or you have too many people talking on Facebook about, in discussion forums or on their status messages about your product. How do you reconcile that in a way that scales and then make it actionable so that you can respond effectively? And that's really one of the big reasons why I'm working at Salesforce is because I think that potentially plugging that into existing business processes and specifically into a CRM system is a way to add structure to the unstructured. And especially in times like these, when companies want to know that any social media investment they're making has ROI, we're seeing an increased demand for people basically connecting the dots between all the money they spend on Facebook ads and actual sales that they get. So now I guess I'll talk about, there's actually 8 habits, but anyways, of successful software design for these social applications. The first one, which we've been talking about basically throughout this presentation, is that it has to be emotional. And it doesn't have to be photos of every aspect of your life, but just having someone's photo there, putting a face to the name really matters, whether it's personal or whether it's professional. And maybe sharing some personal information. Again, it depends on what application you're developing, whether it's collaboration within an organization or across organizations or in a selling situation. In different cases, it makes sense to share different information with each party. The second one is the idea that informal modes of communication are available, that you don't have to leave the application where you currently are and open up another browser to access Gmail or open up Outlook in order to communicate with someone. Facebook did a really good job, again, of creating the messaging and the wall posts and the pokes and different ways of contacting and staying connected with someone that weren't so formal. The third is having news feeds, helping people discover information that they weren't actively seeking, but they're actually interested in. It's latent interest. And that's what makes the Twitter so interesting, is you go on and you always learn something new. There are a lot of unexpected information out there, and you're not going to consume it all, but it's going to take you into a new direction that you wouldn't have otherwise done. And so Facebook has done a really good job of this, not only from their newsfeed updates, but also with birthday reminders. Facebook gives you excuses and reasons to stay in touch with people because it gives you information about them. Now, I found out recently that a friend of mine from Stanford actually got engaged. She and I aren't close enough for her to invite me to her wedding, but I was still happy for her and I still wanted to congratulate her. And without Facebook, I never would have known, and I never would have been able to partake in that. The next one is the persistence of the ad hoc discussion and experience information that happens. So there's a lot of social media out there where someone will blog about something or they'll make a comment on a discussion forum and then it goes away. One huge capability of both Facebook and Twitter is that you can actually go back in time and search all those conversations that took place and even trend them over time and see how it's changed. There's a really important time element there. The next one I would say is, I can't stress enough, it's what I talk about in most of my Q&A and a lot of the media interviews that I do, because it's really top of mind, especially when you're talking about enterprise. And that is having user privacy controls, letting people tier their different relationships and decide what information they want to share with whom. Enterprise software traditionally didn't have any user level settings. They were all administrated from the top down. So the Salesforce admin or the Oracle admin, he or she would decide who gets to see what information. And to be able to democratize that or change that power dynamic and still have that, but also let the user decide what other controls there should be, is a really powerful one. And I think Facebook has done a good job. I mean, how many of you in here use the Facebook privacy settings? Okay, so just about everyone. And I think this is not reflective of the general population, because a lot of people don't know that it's available. And so I think that's just an education process we'll have to go through. But for all of you, certainly, it's become an expectation that you have out of applications to be able to control that. The next one is the sense of recency. And knowing that something has changed since the last time you visited a website or visited a web application, not only does it give you reasons to keep coming back, but also it gives you access immediately to the things that have changed. So especially for a database system like Salesforce, I mean, if nothing has changed, there's no reason to keep revisiting it. Only when an action has occurred or something, there's a new state achieved, do you want to be notified, and then do you want to look at that? So that's something that we think about a lot. Then the seventh concept is the notion of filtering by trusted sources. This goes back to what we talked about earlier with transitive trust. I mean, there's been such an explosion of content and information out on the web that we need to rely on our friends and trusted sources to filter through all of that. So instead of trying to read every news article out there, only reading the ones that your friends come across or suggest, or only if you tend to consume a lot of content, being able to return the favor for your friends. And similarly, in a lot of enterprise applications, there's a lot of information. Now you can capture everything. You can data mine everything. How do you make sure that you're sharing what's important and flagging what's important? And then the last one, which is certainly not least, is having a more people-centric view of enterprise software. I mean, a lot of enterprise software in the past was data object-centric. So it was based on the opportunity record or the lead record. Instead of thinking about the data that's there, can we think about people? Can we start to think about, now that we have access to the World Wide Web of people instead of just the World Wide Web of information, can we use them and what their motivations are to drive design for everything else? So, to help formalize a lot of this stuff, so after we talked about building applications for marketing and sales and recruiting and customer service, and after I used Face Connector, as two companies, Salesforce and Facebook came together and they said, can we make it easy for applications developers and designers to come up with more enterprise social applications? So I worked on this developer toolkit with a lot of the team at Facebook, and this is something that we rolled out a few months ago, and it's called Force.com for Facebook. And essentially what it is it's a developer toolkit that makes it easy within the Force.com development environment to build Facebook apps. So you have access to all of the Facebook APIs. And the benefit, of course, being that not only speed of development, because you don't have to worry about the hosting and the data center and the servers and configuring everything, because Salesforce as a platform has all of that. But also you have instant access to enterprise level features like having 5 nines of reliability, so your service is always up, unlike some of the social media sites out there. And you have access to enterprise sharing and security and permissions, all of the things that take years to build. And the most capital intensive features of any enterprise application comes with the Salesforce platform. And so now we're really trying to, basically it's a call to action for a lot of Facebook developers to think about maybe starting to build some business applications. I mean, everyone's talking about monetization these days and how difficult it is in the consumer space. Well, enterprise software is several $100 billion market a year, and it's been largely untapped in terms of what social applications can be built. And so we've seen continued growth in the number of Facebook applications out there, but the vast majority of them are still consumer. And so my call to action for all of you in this room is to think about what kinds of applications you might be able to build for the enterprise consumer. And with that, I want to open it up for Q&A. Thanks. Oh, yeah.
So I guess one person I have that kind of creepy when, like, if you're cold calling someone and you know all this stuff about them, but they don't expect your call at all. I mean, you know, maybe if you're calling Mary, you don't want to mention that, you know.
Yeah, so what we found is, so a couple thoughts on that. The question, if you guys didn't all hear, is, isn't it creepy if someone cold calls you and they know all this information about you? So it's true. So the first one is, we all as individuals have to be accountable for what information we choose to share with whom, and being comfortable with what you decide. So just like we take accountability for what we say based on who we see face to face, we have to make sure that accountability extends to our online presence. The second one is, what I've found that a lot of the salespeople that I know and have interviewed for this book do is that they call it out. They say, hey, I found your name on LinkedIn, or I found your name on Facebook, and then instantly it explains why they know this information about you. Yes?
You mentioned trusted sources as an important factor for filtering information. Doesn't that conflict with the notion of friend being so diffused that basically, you know, anybody who knows your dog can be your friend? I mean, how do you know, there's no real filtering going on there if there's such a huge number of, quote, friends, then how does that work with trusted information sources, or trusted sources?
That's a great question. So again, I have a two-part answer. The first one is, what made Facebook successful vis-a-vis a lot of the earlier social networks like Friendster and Orkut? A lot of the research has shown is actually that most people only accept friend requests or only initiate friend requests with people they actually know, people that they know offline. And so it tends to be much more sustainable. But the second one, to your point, is that it has reached some sort of tipping point where you're not necessarily best friends with everyone that you're there with, and that's where friend lists play a big role. So friend lists are groups of ways of grouping your friends and tiering them, and using a combination of friend lists and privacy controls, you can choose to share information with very small subsets of people and not with others. And then Facebook is continually refining their model, because if you have 2,500 friends like I do, they can't show me updates from everybody. They have an algorithm for determining what's most interesting to me. And they're continually tweaking that. And as a Facebook user, you can actually thumbs up or thumbs down individual people and say, hey, more about this person or hide this person, as a way to help make your filters more accurate. Yes?
Go back to what you were talking about, hyper-targeting. And so Facebook has had that information for a long time, and 200 million users is a lot of users. But they haven't seemed to have gotten as much traction in terms of actually getting the ads on that plan. Do you think that's just something that hasn't happened yet and will happen soon, or can you speculate?
Yeah, I think inventory for the ads has been a big problem. First of all, because they didn't go with any of the standard ad formats that went around, so people had to come up with new ways. They had to develop specific ad copy and ad collateral just for Facebook, which prior to Facebook being really big didn't really make sense. But I do see it being more mainstream. They're getting better at targeting based on the criteria. And with Facebook Connect, now it's not just the ads showing up on Facebook. Potentially, I see where things are going are they might create an ad network across all the websites on the internet, and then that would hopefully do a better job of both attracting more advertisers as well as getting better click-throughs. Yes?
How mature do you think, so thinking about perhaps abuse of the information that's resident within these systems, how mature do you think the abuse technology is relative to the social technologies available? I'm thinking that say in the email situation, it was a while before phishing became prevalent, and one has the feeling now that there's a little bit more to go on phishing, and that coupled with hyper-targeting could make it a very virulent form of.
Yeah, I think that there's a really big potential risk there. I know Facebook knows that too. They have an entire team dedicated to anti-fraud, anti-phishing. There's one improvement over email in that you can specify what kinds of people can message you. So you can say only my friends can message me, or when someone searches on my name, nope, it doesn't show up except for people who are already my friends. So there's good privacy there. Where we're seeing some potential risk is where passwords are compromised and people log in and then take advantage of, or they take hold of your online identity and they start doing all these things as you. And especially as we think about more commerce being done on Facebook, there's a huge risk there. But
Or creating spurious identities.
Yes.
En masse to take take advantage of mutual statistical effects.
yeah, that's true. And so I think that's something that's inevitable, because that's when you know you've made it, is when the hackers go after you. Yeah.
It seems like to me that a lot of the kind of enterprise applications we're talking about would be a much better fit for building them on top of the LinkedIn platform. We haven't really seen that take off. Do you have any thoughts on why that might be?
I do, because it's something that I struggled with on a personal level. So when I built Face Connector, I actually wanted to do it on LinkedIn, but they didn't have a publicly available API. So I think that's why they haven't had as many applications. And for, in their defense, they have a very professionally focused network, and they need to protect it in a certain sense. So they've just taken a different approach. I think as a developer, when you think about what platform you want to build on, you want to see which one is the largest and which one's the fastest growing. And LinkedIn has something like 30 million users, Facebook has 200 million. And so I think that's what's driven a lot of the growth in development that we've seen. Yes?
I have a different view of business, how to do business, and from my experience. A personal business network is the most precious thing you have, and you don't want to share it with everybody. Because it's worth a lot of money. So to give an example, personally know many people who make millions of dollars just because of the people they know. And it would be foolish to share in a public forum like Facebook. Everybody they know. So because it's not appropriate. If you go into a business meeting, you don't want people to know who you know. You want to establish a trust and then share maybe a certain percentage of who you know. You may also be able to threaten people. By and so that happens. You get even fired in companies if you know too many people. So it's just, there's a risk to it.
That's a great point.
You don't want to go there. You protect it. And Rolodex, that's the old-fashioned term, is an extremely precious thing. Only very few people have access to that. Having certain phone numbers, having certain accesses are extremely important to be a successful business person in this country and the world. And that would be compromised by this.
Well, that's funny you mentioned, because that's what I have on the cover of my book. I don't know if you can tell, but it's a Rolodex of Facebook profiles. I think that's right. There is a way on both Facebook and LinkedIn to not show anyone who your contacts are, so that you can keep that private.
Right, but then there's no point in putting it in, because the people can hack into this. The people in this room would be easily able to hack into that. It's not a problem.
I think that's a great point.
Sort of more broad social speculation. You said that the choice of words like friend made a difference in how you treated people on your Facebook account, because you'd call them friends, links or whatever they were.
Yeah.
Is there a reverse effect? Is what we think of as friends in the world changing because of this?
I think that's a great question. What do you guys think? Have your relationships degraded? I've certainly well, I think there's a strong opinion over there. But in my personal life, because of this book, I've found my network expand dramatically. And people who I never would have called friends before, I've accepted their friend request, even though I have them on the lowest or the strictest privacy settings and they can't see anything about me. I guess I do feel a little bit more open, and maybe I don't know, that would be interesting to survey people and see how many people they call friends in the offline world.
So I'm just going to speculate and combine two of the things that you showed. So one was kind of the face connector, where a salesperson is looking at a lead and actually see the prospect, and the other piece being the hyper-targeting piece. Mm-hmm. So when is Salesforce going to put out a product which basically says, oh, you can now do advertising just to your leads and get really high CPMs just to the people who are already in your leads list?
That would be scary.
And you first send them 9 ads, and then you call them up, and then you try to close them.
Maybe you should build an next killer app. Anyway, I'm going to stick around because I really like the informal dialogue that happens. Is that okay? Terry, is that?
That's fine. You can do whatever you want.
Okay, I don't know what your schedule was.
You can go to 2 if you want.
Okay. But I'll definitely be here because I think that this is such a new area that, especially in an academic institution, I'm sure a lot of you, either in your personal experience or through the research projects you're working on, have been thinking about a lot of these same questions. But after the fact, I'm on Twitter, of course, and you can check out my website, which I wanted to demo for you, and has the Facebook Connect integration. And of course, you can email me. And I'm just really delighted to be back on campus where I spent many years, many formative years, for the launch of my book last week and this week. And I also wanted to invite all of you to an event that we're having at Stanford Bookstore in a few weeks. There's going to be food and music. It'll be fun. I'm doing it with faculty member in the MS&E department, Tina Seelig, who's the executive director of the Stanford Technology Ventures Program. So you're all welcome to join if you want. Thank you.
Thank you.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.